Welcome to the Business and People podcast. I am your host, Walt Bayliss, and on today's show, we're talking to Trish Jones. Trish is an inspiration. She achieved her MBA while 5.5 months pregnant and has gone on to achieve incredible things. During this interview, it's a really emotional one as we talk about getting past your internal turmoil and sometimes coming from a dark place and realizing the future that's in front of you. Trish runs an incredible group of people around her. She is the founder of Inspirational Women and Ditch the Limits podcast and has an important message to share. I really love this episode. We got really in depth with Trish and she was so generous with her expression and what she'd been through, helping other people get past their own blocks. Enjoy this episode, take it with you and share it with someone who may need it. And welcome to the Business and People podcast with your special guest, Trish Jones. Trish Jones, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
It's so fantastic to have you with us, Trish. Reading through your bio and knowing a little bit about you, we've done our research, we've jumped in. And as I mentioned in the introduction, you're the founder of The Influential Woman. You're also the founder of the Ditch Your Limits podcast, which is gaining momentum even as we speak. You're a speaker, you're an author, and you are a guiding light for female entrepreneurs. And I just want to grab hold of you and say thank you for doing that. How did that all come to pass? Where did you get started from?
Right. Okay. Well, a little bit of a backstory. We'd been married 14 years. I think it was 14 years. And I decided to give up work to look after my baby girl. I was going to go back. I was a flying a career woman, right, going places. But when I held my baby in my arms, this selfish notion came over me that said, nobody's looking after my child except me and her daddy, of course.
Nice.
And so at a marriage seminar of all things, I persuaded my husband to allow me to start my coaching practice.
Fantastic.
Great place to do it, right? Marriage seminar. And anyway, as I started doing it, I was doing leadership development, and that really wasn't going places. Just leave it at that. It wasn't going places, and it wasn't about my leadership. It was getting myself out there that was a problem. But then something radical happened, and I just felt that I had to tell my husband about the abuse that I endured when I was a child, a teenager, and I'd never told him before. I'd never told anybody. I'd held the secret for over 20 years.
Yeah.
And I tried to avoid it. And anyway, cut a long story short, I ended up having to tell him one day. And I then told my coach, who lives in California, and I remember kind of almost blubbering, this is what happened. And she said to me, Trish, what do you want it to look like? And let me tell you, Walt, I felt like somebody had slapped me in my face. It's like, how can you be so cold, woman? This is what I've just told you. But she herself had been abused as well. And so we had similar stories, in fact, because one of the bits I missed out, I was raised with my grandparents. And one day I came home from school and my grandmother had been brutally murdered in our home. My coach, her mother had been strangled when she was 5 years old. And anyway, she basically challenged me and said, what do I want my life to look like? And it was like, whoa. And during the call, she then said to me, I really think you ought to tell this story. And I said, listen, I've kept the secret for 20 years and now you want me to go air my dirty linen in public? I don't think so. And she said, no, I think you really should. So then I was speaking to one of my pastors one day and I said the same thing to her, Christine's crazy. And my pastor looks at me and says, yes, I think you should. I'm like, have you gone crazy as well?
But you're looking for a sympathetic shoulder and all they're giving you is a launch pad to get started.
Exactly. And so I spoke to my husband one day and my husband just looked at me and he said, Trish, yes. And he said, and let me tell you something. He said, there are men out there suffering with what you have gone through, but it manifests in different ways. It might be that they become abusive to their wives, they're alcoholics, they go into drugs, or they very insular, they just don't come out of themselves. So he said, whilst I accept that you are going to be speaking to women, he said, let me tell you that you will touch the lives of men as well. And basically that was all the permission I needed. And
that's fantastic.
I remember speaking to my dad and telling my dad what had happened and him saying to me, go and speak to your mum, and so long as you get her permission, because part of the story is that my mum was only 15 when she had me. And then the big shocker was that I discovered later on that the man responsible for murdering my grandmother was my biological father.
Wow.
And so, talk about ditch limits, right? I've had to almost rewire my brain to say who I am, who I'm not, right? And using that for other women. And they don't have to go through what I've gone through.
Yeah.
But it's that point where you feel like you're up against a brick wall and you don't know how to get out. And it's like, when you're afraid of a dog and you back into the corner and you know that you can get the dog to not bite you by not being fearful, but you don't know how to be fearful. And so that's what started it for me. And and also as well, I did not want my daughter to endure what I had endured. And so I was going to break this cycle.
That is a fantastic story. As cold as it felt at the time, that question of what do you want it to look like has completely changed. And do you take that forward now when you're coaching, when you're with someone, and it may be someone who's successful already that's bringing you on board as a coach. It may be somebody that's struggling themselves and you're taking them through. Do you have that same recollection of what do you want it to look like echoing in your message to people?
Absolutely. And I say to people before I even coach them, are you one of these people who like to be challenged, or do you want me to ask you 50 million questions in order to get to the answer that you want? Because it's not about my answer. When I ask you a question, it's not about you giving me an answer. It's about you speaking to yourself. And so I say to them, look, I can't be like these therapists and some of these coaching programs who say, ask these 50 million questions, because if I see something that I think is a stumbling block, I will ask about it. Are you okay with that? And I've yet to have somebody say no.
It'll be a brave person that said no, I think, but as fearful as they would be at that time.
Well, put it this way, I would say to them, I just don't know how useful I can be to you. And just a quick story, 2 people that I know came to me because they had problems. Both of them were relationship problems. One of them was going through divorce and the other one had gone through a really bad breakup. And they then went to somebody else who is a therapist because they felt they ought to go to a professional,
Sure.
Even though I was a professional at the time. And one of them was paying me, the other one I was kind of doing it gratis. And after the call, both of them rang me at different times and they're crying on the phone. I cannot believe what has just happened. I've sat down, I've spoken to this person. They're just like, yeah. And one of them even said, are you not going to say something? Oh, I can't. I can only ask you questions. And I said, that is why I cannot be this is working for the NHS. I don't know if you know anything about the NHS. So you have to abide by their rules. So effectively, it's talk therapy. And some people need talk therapy, but what most people need is a dose of what I call pattern interrupt. I want you to get out of what you've been thinking, feeling, saying, doing, and say something else.
So Trish, I think that skill and ability to take someone out of their original pattern and help them to really, I mentioned, be a light and guide them forward. I think that's an incredible skill and something that, again, I'm so grateful that you're taking it through to the world. One of the things that I'm really curious about is, as you've created your business, you talk a lot about storytelling, making that story part of their journey and part of their future moving forward. How does that fit into the whole breaking of the cycle thing?
Well, first and foremost, right, when you have endured abuse or trauma, tragedy, or whatever, it is so easy to lose your voice, right? Because you live in that moment of what happened to you and then all of the other things that have happened since. And what we don't realize is that we have actually literally thought and talked and done our own future. So we've created a future that we don't want. And to break that pattern, we literally have to change our narrative. Right. Okay. So we've got to change what we say. We've got to change what we do. And sorry, remind me, what was the question? Sorry,
I'm curious as to how your message about incorporating their story becomes their guiding path forward to boost their career.
Right. Okay. So yes, with regards to storytelling, it is the stories that they tell themselves. So like I said, I have to get them to change their narrative. And so they can say, this is my story. And just like my coach, what do you want your life to look like? She was effectively saying, Trish, you have the power to rewrite your story. And so I say to people, it is nigh on impossible, coming back to the voice, it is nigh on impossible. It's not impossible, but it's almost impossible to share your story and be inauthentic. And so I help them write their story. So even if they're not going to build their business around it, even if they're not going to share it with the world, it is for them to say, this is what happened, but this is how I'm going to move forward. In fact, my husband and I were having a laugh yesterday because when I was younger, I never used to read books, believe it or not. My mum started laughing at me when I did my MBA and said, oh, you just got your head in books all the time. And I'm like, Mum, when I was growing up, I never read books like you, I just wasn't interested. And the first story I ever read from cover to cover as a teen was a book called Please Make Me Cry. And it was about a lady who was a drug addict and prostitute and everything. And then she became a Christian, and she then tells the story of what happened after. And my husband and I were laughing because we were saying, all of those books, they were really good until they became Christians. and it's not to be demeaning, but what we were saying was the action was in what went on before.
Yeah, sure.
But then she tells a story, and I rehearsed one part of it, which I won't go over here. But I said to him, that was the thing that I remembered the most about that book, whilst all the bits when she was taking drugs and, prostituting and everything else, we loved the adrenaline rush of that story. But I said there was one thing that she talked about that was so profound. And I said, believe it or not, whilst we say that those parts of the story were boring, it was the part of the story that is still in my heart. And that is what I want other people to do, because it can be, I could see your face right when I'm telling you story. And I've done it before where I have told my story and people are in the audience crying. And I would tell them, I can lift you out of that, and I can get them to cry with me, and I can get them to laugh with me. And I bring them out. And but what I want them to remember is not what happened to me. It is what is going on in my life right now, because I'm saying to you that wherever you are and wherever I was, it doesn't need to stay that way. So that's where I bring the storytelling into it, to get them to tell the story, but also build a bridge to get to the other side.
I love it. I think I've done a blog post myself on it's the stories that we tell ourselves. But thinking about that, like when you're talking about someone who's coming to you in a particular position, let's say, and again, I keep coming back to that. Maybe they're in trouble, but I'm sure you've had experience where people are just literally coming to you. They're already succeeding and they just want to go further. So wherever they find themselves, absolutely. I think it's fascinating to look at that and say you're the author of the next chapter, because correct me if I'm wrong, Trish, and I want to hear it from you, but people come and they say, I am, as in, I am someone who has been abused. I am someone who is at this position. I am. And that's a present tense. And as you said, that is completely not talking about ditching the limits. That's literally putting the walls up around and saying, this is all I am right now. Is that a reality, like in terms of these conversations you're having with people? Are you taking them from that and saying, get above the wall and look beyond? Is that the thing?
Absolutely. I talk about blowing up the image on the inside of you so that what you manifest is on the outside of you. And being a Christian, right, I absolutely believe that we're made in the image of God. You don't hear God saying, I am sick, I am broke, right. I am destitute. And we've got to say the truth of what is, because the one thing that I have to explain to people, Walt, is that you have to differentiate, that you have to look at the difference between fact and truth. The fact is you were abused. The truth is you are this awesome person created for a purpose. And no matter what happened to you in your past, boy, I tell you, I know I'm speaking to somebody right now because it's really touching me. No matter what happened to you in your past, your purpose was never tainted. Your purpose remained intact and the same. And so you've got to get on that path of colliding with your purpose, because we can use every situation, everything that has happened to us, we can use it to influence, affect somebody else.
Yeah, beautiful. Absolutely. I absolutely love that message, Trish. And I hope for everybody that's listening on this one as a podcast, they can recognize that they are more than than today, and the truth of the future, etc. I absolutely love it. Trish, when you were pregnant, you were 5.5 months pregnant when you graduated with your MBA. And as you said, your mum was telling you, hey, you've got your nose in the books all this time. And I absolutely love the dedication. If you could go back now to that young woman who's putting on the cap, the board as a graduating MBA student, if you could go back to that day, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to that young Patricia back then?
Wow. Right. Well, I think the first thing that I would give, the first advice that I would give is that you are not your MBA. Okay. Now, I learned that early on, thank goodness. And my pastor and I used to even have arguments over this, because she'd say, no, you need to put your MBA on everything that you write. And I'm like, do you know what? People don't really care about the MBA. What they care about is what I can give them, right? And I could have all the accolades. And she had a doctorate, right? She used to say to me, you've got to go and take your doctorate if you want to be my friend. And I'm like, if you want to stay my friend, you need to drop the doctorate, right?
Nice.
I'm happy to be Patricia Jones. I don't need to be Dr. Patricia Jones, So if I could give myself the advice, if I could go back then and give myself some advice, first of all, I would say take some time out, because sometimes we want to rush into everything. And of course, it was cap and gown. Then we went on holiday. Then it was come back, have baby. And, life is all go, 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 go. Yeah. And sometimes I think we need to take some time and reflect. And then if I knew what I knew back then, I'm telling you, Walt, there were times that I went to bed at night and I was scared. I was scared that my husband was going to find out what had happened and I'd not told him, and whether he was going to leave me, etc. I would sit there and I would write a message in terms of who I am. I would look at all of the attributes that I have and look at how I can help somebody else. And instead of staying in that ditch, really staying in that ditch of, this happened to you, so you're not good enough, I literally would have changed the narrative that was going on in my mind much, much sooner. And hey, the other thing I would have done is listen to other people, because I was fortunate to have some great people around me, not just the students who I studied with for the MBA, my husband, who was always my cheerleader, my parents, who always saw the best in me. Everybody always says, oh, you talk so much, but it was the inspirer that people used to say, wow, you're so inspirational.
Nice.
I would have listened to those people more than I did the negative thoughts that was going in my mind, or the negative things that some people had said to me in the past. And that, Walt, is just a starting point, I think, for anybody who wants to have a conversation with their younger self.
I think that's an important message. And, typically, Trish, when we're doing our interviews, I have a tradition, as early into the podcast as we are, of doing what we call a 60-second challenge. And typically in my 60-second challenge, I'm asking our guest to give some business advice to a friend. But if you don't mind, I would like to change our 60-second challenge today because of your history and your foundation with the influential woman. I would like to change my 60-second challenge. So with your permission, if you are able in 60 seconds to speak to someone who at the moment has that history and that dark secret that they're scared will make people who love them think less of them inside, and it's keeping them up at night, and it's destroying their self-image and their future. If you had 60 seconds to give a message to that person, what message would that be?
Wow, I would say 3 words to start off with. Flip the script. Right? It's I had a client who taught me about scripting. We do affirmations. And she said, look, affirmations don't work. And in 55 days, if I told you what this person manifested, but I can't in 60 seconds. But she wrote a script where instead of saying, everything is future tense, she wrote it as if it were now. I am this. Today is a fantastic day because what I have done is X, Y, Z. And you know how an actor assumes the role that he is playing?
Yep.
This is what we have to do in our lives. And so you might feel like an imposter when you first do that. Don't worry about the imposter syndrome. You've got to take that script that you've been relaying in your mind, and that's been bringing you down, and you've got to put light on it. And the only way you put light on it is by putting positive words over it, is by saying what you want and what you want your life to look like. So honestly, it's flipping the script and creating a new narrative.
I talk a lot to people about waking up. And you know, it struck me one day, Trish, driving down the motorway, and I'm fortunate in my position where, you know, we've been able to create something that I'm not in that daily traffic. But I was driving down the motorway one day, and I happened to glance over and see all of these people on the other side of the motorway in that zombie mode. Do you know what I mean? Like they may be going home and they have no idea how they got from the office to the house. They just hope they didn't run a red light along the way. You know, I heard somebody say, have you ever gone through a red light and you think to yourself, oh my goodness, was that light red or green? And you look in the rear vision mirror to see, and the person who's behind you also comes through, and you think, oh, thank goodness it was green. But you don't realize that the person behind you is thinking, my goodness, was that light red or green? Like that whole zombie thing. And I talk to people about waking up and realizing that they're in charge of their own life. And I just wanted to bring it back to what you were just saying there, being able to flip the script. Because if we, and taking that as an actor, I think was a really powerful point. Because if we're able to flip the script, if we're able to rewrite the lines and become the director of our life, rather than the audience member viewing it, then I think from a personal perspective, you and I right here on this podcast, we can ask people to enjoy the fact that they can direct their own screenplay. They can write their own lines. And I love that. Do you encourage the repetition in the same way so that they can assume that character? Is that something that you would recommend as a helpful step?
Do you know what? It's whatever works, right? But the way that my client had done it was she wrote it almost like a narrative. There was a few paragraphs, and when she was going through the stuff she was going through, she'd said that she'd read it out 3 or 4 times a day. So it's not something that you have to memorize. You literally write it as a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs as if you're there, and you can pick that script out and read it 3 times a day. But the other thing is, in terms of repetition, if, for example, you are going through a situation and you know when you kind of see something and you go back into that story that you don't want, you can certainly absolutely have a saying that you use to get you back out of it. In fact, they teach you this, right, just before you have your baby, you know, how you're going to have your baby, and they give you all these different options that you can have to ease the pain. And one of them is that you can see, you know, what the Caribbean looks like or whatever, right?
Right, yeah,
so
sure.
You have a term that you use that's going to help you know the pain. I absolutely agree with that, because even if we have a script that we say 3-4 times a day, it's all the rest of the day when something happens or you see something or you read something, and you can easily go back into that yesterday's story. And so you just have a phrase even just to bring you out of that.
I'll give people a suggestion. If you're listening to this on a podcast and you're stuck in traffic and you're thinking to yourself, you know, how am I going to do this? Think about it in terms of the director's chair and the audience's chair. All right. Sometimes, and I've said to people before, if you find yourself as the audience member, looking at your life and playing it out the way that you don't want it to play, stand up physically and turn around and put yourself in a director's chair and change the script. Absolutely. So if you're listening to this in the car, like just picture yourself standing up out of the audience, moving across and sitting in the director's chair and talking to the actor saying, right, now let's get it on. Let's move it forward.
Absolutely.
Trish, I'm loving talking to you. Do you know, I want to take away, not take away, but move from the counseling role, I guess, of helping people through those challenges and into the entrepreneur space. And I can see from your background that you've been able to create something and be that director, create something within your life that is amazing. What's a day in the life of Trish these days? How does your typical day kind of play out?
When the daughter's not here, when she's here.
Well, it's both the same thing, right? Like it's all part of the same day.
Yeah, she's on holiday at the moment. But yeah, in terms of my day playing out, I must admit sometimes I go to bed far too late, and I do not recommend that to any. sometimes it's a quiet times, but it is, I tend to write a list of what I need to do, like scrappy bit of paper that it might be. But I do it before I go to bed. And the reason I do it before I go to bed is I learned when I was doing my exams when I was younger, that the last thing that I read before I went to bed, I would start thinking about it. And I swear it's the only reason I passed my science exam. I'm so rubbish at maths and science, right? Just not. And I swear that is how I passed, was because I would read those things before I went to bed, right? So I write my list before I go to bed, because then it percolates. It's on my mind. And, you know, if I'm going to have dreams, I'm going to have dreams about those things.
Nice.
Right?
The solutions while you're sleeping, yeah.
And when I get up, I try, and this is a limit I've got to ditch, I try not to look at my emails when I wake up.
Okay.
Right, and get on with what I've got to do. For me, it is reading my Bible and praying. And I don't mean, you know, just like, oh, zombie, you know, got to come and do it. I got to see myself. For me, I want to see myself the way God sees me. Mm-hmm. God, what have you got for me today? Where are you going? I want to go with you. And then sometimes I sit down and I have coffee, right, and I'm just thinking I'm doing nothing. And then when I open my computer, and then I can start looking at certain things. But also, the one thing that it took me too many years to learn is I have to decide what my day is going to look like before I start my day. Because I'm telling you, when you're an entrepreneur, and especially when you're just starting out, you'll get the telephone calls. Trish, do you want to go to lunch? Trish,
yeah, of course. You've got plenty of time. You work for yourself. You've got all day. Yeah, sure you do.
Exactly. I hate ironing with a passion.
Right.
But let me tell you, in the early days, I could see that pile of ironing and I got to go do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
And so
find any excuse to get up and out of the desk and away.
Absolutely, yeah. And whilst I've never been diagnosed ADHD, I can have 50 million ideas in a day compared to somebody else. You know, if you look at the I used insights, but I am the socializer in terms of personality types, right? I like to have conversations with people. I like to get up and go. I like to be on the move. And sometimes you got to glue your backside to this chair and say, you ain't going nowhere until you have done X, Y, Z. And so if you already have that in your mind as to what you need to accomplish today, don't beat yourself up if you don't accomplish it. But you've got to have the idea that this is what I'm working on. And so other than that, my days can be quite flexible because, as I said, I have a child here. Unfortunately, as I said to you earlier, my husband suffers with tinnitus, but he's also had chronic fatigue. So he has not worked for, I believe it's 15 or 16 years now. Mm. So he does do some stuff for me in the background, etc. But yeah, so it's kind of getting up and looking after them and doing certain things. If my husband heard that, he would shout, "You don't look after me, I look after myself."
and don't let him hear you say that he doesn't work.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
he'd have a conversation about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I allow some flexibility. When I was at college, right, we did this thing. Now, what was it called? It was, I can't remember the term now, but basically it meant that there were some things that just didn't move. And there were other things that you had to be flexible about. And that is what I do. There are some things that don't bother me because I've got to get this done. And then there are other things I've got to leave a certain percentage of my day to be flexible. Yeah. So that's how I pan out my day. And then when it comes to evening, I wish I had a time that I could say, yes, I stop at X, Y, Z. I don't.
Okay.
This is where I'm going to say, do as I say and not as I do.
Yeah, it's hard to live that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's healthy to have a time when you shut down and don't let the last thing, oh my gosh, this is just so powerful. Don't let the last thing you do at night be anything to do with business. Pick up a book. Yeah. You know, this is what I'm reading at the moment, Hello Tomorrow. Pick up a book and read a page even of it and meditate on that as well as your list before you go to bed, because otherwise all the woes of tomorrow just catch up with you and you can't sleep. And yeah, so that's how my day.
It sounds like a busy schedule. Trish, you know, so the most of our audience, I would imagine, are in that kind of entrepreneur or even the entrepreneur space where they're looking to get out of what they're doing. But for a moment, can we just have a quick conversation about women in the corporate space, I guess, who are working a job? And
Yeah.
the argument that comes through, and I saw it written the other day so powerfully, a woman should never have to choose whether she wants to be a mother or a career woman.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that dilemma that exists for women today?
Very strongly.
Yeah.
In fact, I've written articles about it. And for me, I'm a strong character insofar as I don't care what you think about me. It really doesn't matter. I've gone through that now. I've gone past that. But even when I was in corporate, I didn't leave because I was worried about what the men were going to say about me, because I would just remind them that their mother had to bring them into this world. And without their mother, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing now. This corporation wouldn't exist.
Nice.
So as far as I'm concerned, one of the things I talk about is doing your business, speaking into the lives of other people without losing your femininity, without thinking that, oh, I can't be that wife, I can't be that mother, I can't be that woman, I have to be like a man. Because look, there are attributes that men have that I don't have. I asked my husband to pick something up the other day, and he looked at me as if, really, you can't lift it up yourself? And I went, you're a man, you're stronger than me. And he said, oh, you acknowledge that, do you? And I said, look, there are certain things that I just acknowledge that, men can do that I can't. But there are certain things that I can do that a man can't do. Men cannot have babies. Right? And I feel a proud, privileged individual that I was able to bring a child into this world, a human being into this world. So I would say to women in the corporate world, absolutely be you. Be you, because even the men who may be around you telling you, oh, you can't do this, or making you feel that you can't do what they do because you're a woman, take the view that you have something unique that a man cannot have, and bring the feminine touch into the organization, right? They need it. I could go on about the organization I work for. I loved it there. But they need that feminine touch. We don't need lots more men. We need men being men and women being women. That is my view.
I love it, and I think there's been a big push, as we know, to give that better dissection, I guess, to board members and that kind of stuff, to try and bring that equality through. And I was talking to my daughter the other day. So as a father to two young girls, I'm conscious of that still battle, I guess, out there in the workforce. And we were talking the other day, and my eldest daughter, she said to me about the President of the United States. And she said to me, I think a woman should be President of the United States. And I said to her, that's an interesting thought. Why? And she said, well, because they do a better job. And she's 11. So that's a great thing for her to think of. And I said to her, now, Trish, let me clarify before the sparks fly from your eyes. I said to her, I disagree. And she said, what? What do you mean you disagree? And I said to her, I think the best person should be in the role.
Absolutely.
Regardless,
Absolutely.
Take away the need for a particular balance of board members and et cetera. Put the best person in the role and let nature speak for itself. I think, well, that's my personal.
Absolutely. And, listen, as everyone can see, I'm black, right? and I'm proud of who I am. And I was only saying to somebody the other day, do you remember back in the early 90s when there was a big, massive push in this country for equality? And it was, you got to have so many black or Asians in your group. And I was having a conversation with my neighbors who were white, and he was saying, oh, because I was going for a job, oh, you ought to use your color as your stepping stone. I said, hey, brother, look, I said, when I go for a job, you got to give me that job because I'm as good as or better than the other people that you have interviewed. Don't give me a job because of the color of my skin.
Don't you love that? Do you have The Voice over in the UK? The Voice, the talent show, the stage.
Yes, we do.
Don't you love the blind auditions when they're honestly sitting there? The people who know what they're doing in the music industry are sitting there, hearing the quality of the presentation, regardless of
Yeah,
what that person looks like or
absolutely.
presents, or it's a
Yeah,
singing competition, let it be about the singing. And, you know, if we
yeah,
all had that opportunity to have the blind audition, I think it'd be a
yeah.
much fairer place, that's for sure. Trish,
Absolutely.
I think I'm so grateful for your time, and we mentioned your message to that gowned and bordered graduate student all those years
Mhm.
ago, being able to recognize those words of wisdom. What would you say if you had an opportunity to speak to a room full of graduate students today, male, female, across all nations? You've got a room full of those hopeful students just about
Mhm.
to come into what we call the real world, and they're about to embark on this journey that we've had a little bit of experience with, you and I. What
Mhm.
message would you want to give to that room full of students?
Right. Okay. um, University grads. I think when people graduate, and I think I was the same, although I got out not long after I graduated, right? But I think university grads, they have had their dreams. They have gone to university because they want this qualification that's going to get them a better job. I would say to them that every step of the way, use it as a stepping stone. So you may not get that job at PricewaterhouseCooper or whatever they're called. You might not get that job there. You might not get the job that you absolutely want, but that doesn't mean that you give up hope on your dream. What you do is, even if it means that you stack shelves in Tesco's or Costco's or whatever it might be, all the time you're thinking of what I want my life to look like, and you use everything as an opportunity and as a learning. Don't ever get stuck in your story, because where you are today is only a chapter. It
Mm,
is not the whole book.
love it. I love it. And what's next for you, Trish? Where will we see your horizon as we look forward?
Right. Okay. Well, something interesting happened. You said earlier, you said about people waking up. And I have two programs that I semi-wrote some time ago. One of them is called Wake Up Your Voice, and the other one is Wake Up Potential.
Fantastic.
And interestingly, the more I've been speaking to people lately, and even I noticed this over the years with coaching, that and I've said this on a number of occasions, that I don't see the biggest stumbling block with people moving forward as entrepreneurs as being the tools or the doing. It is the limitations that they put on themselves. And so I started focusing more on waking up potential now, because I'm seeing that if I give you the tool and I teach you to use the tool, you might say, "Oh, I've got a little bit of a tech block," but there's always help that can be had. But it's what you believe about yourself that you are able to do that is causing a stumbling block. And so that's where I'm focusing a lot of what I am doing now, because I believe that entrepreneurship is different than being in business, just being a small business, right? Brendan Burchard's book, I was going to say Secrets of Millionaire Mind, the Millionaire Messenger. Um, he says in there, don't allow your small business to make you small-minded. And I believe that the very essence of the term entrepreneur isn't just about building a business and making money. It really is about making a difference. And so if we're going to make that difference, we got to start with building and growing us first.
Being bigger ourselves so that we can be bigger in the community and in the message that we
Absolutely.
deliver. I love it.
Absolutely.
I love it,
Absolutely.
Trish. I'm actually going to go back in the recording and make a note of that book myself. So we'll make sure we put it in the show notes for people there
Right.
as well. Trish, I've got two more questions for you, if it's okay.
Uh-huh.
And as we wrap up, you've mentioned a couple of books during our talk. Has there
Mhm.
been any specific books or media podcasts or interactions with people that you feel have made a big difference in your life?
Well, first of all, Brendan Burchard's book, I keep forgetting what it's called now, The Millionaire Messenger,
Mm-hmm.
that has had a profound impact on my life, big time. Because even though I was telling my story, Brendan actually really made me see that I can use my story to build a business. And it wasn't just about the story, it was about the message, right? So you extract the message from the story. So that was a big thing for me. And if you saw the state of my book and all the notes in there and the post-its, right, you would know that that book has had a major impact on me. The other seminar book that has had an impact on me is T. Harv Eker, Secrets of the Millionaire Mind.
Yep.
And I went to the Millionaire Mind Intensive. This was back in 2005, I believe. And I also have the book. And one of the things in there, you know, people would look at it and say, oh, you know, I'm never going to make it to millionaire status. But it's what people do to become millionaires as opposed to being the millionaire that is the really important thing. And there's one thing he says in there that I just think, yeah, you know, sometimes, you know, we like to moan when things are not going wrong. He says, you know, give yourself 30 days of just not complaining about anything. It is tough as anything, but it really keeps you focused. And so, yes, that book and the seminar itself had a major impact on me. And, you know, I could talk about in the Christian circles, but let me just keep it to, you know, those two books. That, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Trish. And I mentioned I had two questions. So people can keep in touch with you at trishjones.com, obviously. They can follow you at Trish Jones on Twitter. What's the best way for people to do that? How would you say, come and listen to what I've got to say? You're a well-known speaker. You have a great amount of information going out. But what's the best way people can keep in touch with you?
They can either go to my website, but now I would say just keep up with Ditch Your Limits. Go onto YouTube and look for Trish Jones TV. You'll find me there, Trish Jones TV, and subscribe to the podcast, to the video podcast. I will be putting out videos every week. Also, The Influential Woman. If they go to iTunes, they'll find me there. And then they can get consistent messages from me, and people can put their request in as to what they want me to talk about. So.
Fantastic. And Trish, I know that we spoke before we hit the record button about that image, that well-known image of the goldfish bowl jumping from one bowl to the next. And I love the thought that the Ditch Your Limits is the goldfish jumping from the bowl into the ocean. And let's really see how far we can take it. Trish Jones, thank you so much for joining me. You are an inspiration. You're a fantastic ambassador for freedom, for women, for entrepreneurs, and I absolutely love your message. Thank you so much for the time spent. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Walt.